So welcome to meeting number 38 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. And I'd like to welcome from Airsoft.in.Canada, Brian A. McIlmoyle, Director, Nicholas James Martin, Member, who is with us by video conference, I believe, and Ziming Wan, Member. So welcome. So we'll start with Airsoft.in.Canada. Please go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Brian McIlmoyle. I'm the Director at ASIC, Saving Airsoft in Canada Association. I'm joined by Ziming Wan and Nicholas Martin by video conference. Thank you for inviting us here today. Airsoft is a sport practiced by tens of thousands of Canadians all across the country. Airsofters come from diverse backgrounds, all genders and orientations, English and French, casual or enthusiast, sport competitor or collector. Airsoft is enjoyed by those exploring military reenactments and simulations, and by costume role players attending at anime conventions. Airsoft businesses employ over 1,400 people. Today is a very important day for these people. In Canada, recreational airsoft is a $220 million industry, with more than $46 million spent annually on goods and equipment, and more than $36 million on event production and tourism in the small towns that typically host these events. C-21, as currently written, would shutter this industry entirely. The Canadian film, video game, media industry is worth $9+ billion annually, with about $5 billion of those films involving firearms and airsoft gear. Rubber prop guns were made prohibited by Bill C-68 in 1993. Film armors have told us that they are entirely reliant upon the Canadian airsoft retailers because of the next day turnarounds required by film studios. They would require direct access to retail sources for these airsoft equipment. Without it, film productions would be delayed for weeks. Since the accidental shooting of Halen Hutchins, we have been told that Hollywood productions have shrunk their demand for real firearms by 60% and have increased their use of airsoft by 40%, with some film unions calling to shift entirely to airsoft. 66% of Canadian film industry prop guns are airsoft. Film armors that we have consulted have stated that C-21, as currently written, would make Canada far less attractive for these productions, threatening that $5 billion in production. We understand the concerns of law enforcement. In our consultations with them, they noted their top concern was mistaking airsoft for real firearms, in particular where the youths and children were involved. Police are trained to treat any suspected gun as a deadly threat, and this has historically included Nerf blasters, Lego, camera tripods, musical instruments. We should be taking every practical precaution to prevent any potentially tragic incident for both police officers and the persons who are accidentally or negligently abusing airsoft. We believe that the best means to mitigate these risks is an 18+ restriction on the purchase of airsoft, which would prevent children from buying airsoft without parental knowledge. In addition, a legal acknowledgement of risk or waiver, when signed and combined with some clear educational material, will impress upon parents and young adults the important and very mortal responsibility of owning airsoft gear. We believe that this will prevent the majority of police calls for service resulting from accidental and negligent use of airsoft. This would bring us in line with the majority of our peers internationally. If we are to go a step beyond that, ASIC has studied a self-regulatory system similar to that of the United Kingdom's UK Airsoft Retailer Association and the UK Violence Crime Reduction Act, which stipulates membership in an airsoft association in order to possess airsoft. This kind of measure would require higher administrative overhead, but there is a feasible appetite within our community. These measures benefit from joint positions with FSAQ, the Fédération Sportive de Airsoft du Québec, the AABC, the Airsoft Association of BC, and the CSAAA, the Canadian Sporting Arms and Ammunition Association. Bill C-21's proposed redefinition of prohibited device would eliminate airsoft as a sport by changing the legal classification of virtually all airsoft in Canada. It also affects a larger category of products, including paintball markers, pellet guns, Nerf foam blasters, etc., all of which would be impacted by C-21 to varying degrees. How C-21 is written would make airsoft illegal to buy, sell, import, export, or transfer, and would make them subject to confiscation without legal recourse. Current owners would be in possession of prohibited devices and subject to the relevant laws. There is no doubt the legal regulation around airsoft is confusing. Manufacturers, importers, CBSA, and law enforcement find it confusing as well. The legal context of airsoft involves multiple sections of the Criminal Code, the Firearms Act, and examples of case law that involve different definitions, qualifications, and quantifications. We suggest that this committee empower the Government Council to work with consultative bodies such as ASIC and to more comprehensive and exhaustively define replica firearm and or airsoft through regulation. We hope today that the committee can work with our community to develop a solution. I thank you for your time today, Chair, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you. And only 15 seconds over, so good.
I'd like to turn a couple of minutes that I have left to our friends from the airsoft industry. You know, I think everyone in this room understands that airsoft guns don't kill people, but they do get people killed because of the way that they look and because of how they might be used, not in the way that you intended them to use, but perhaps because of their aesthetic, causing perhaps law enforcement to respond in a way that law enforcement should if they see something that looks like a lethal weapon. I don't think anybody here wants to shut down your industry. What is the industry willing to do to help ensure that the airsoft guns that you manufacture or that you use don't look like lethal firearms? I mean, we heard the Nerf analogy earlier, but look, a Nerf gun looks nothing like an airsoft gun. We don't want to shut your industry down. We do want to make it something that doesn't get people killed. So tell us what you would be willing to consider so that we can find ways to work together to make sure that people who are playing this for sport are not able to inadvertently become the cause of young people particularly dying.
I'm going to pass that question over to my technical specialist, Mr. Zimingwan.
Hello, Minister. Thank you for the opportunity to answer your question. So we've actually consulted many active duty law enforcement officers from multiple agencies across Canada. And the general consensus is that we would like to reduce these occurrences in the first place. And also that when this difficult situation does arise, the determining factor generally is not whether or not a person had an object that may or may not have looked like a firearm. The general consensus is that the determining factor is the body language and the mannerisms displayed by the person in this situation. There also have been many cases where objects that are clearly non-firearms have been mistaken for firearms. So an example of that would be Sean Arbuthnot, who is the founding director of ASIC, our organization. He was actually taken down at gunpoint in a city over a camera tripod that looked nothing like a firearm.
So just to interrupt with the time that we have, look, we are trying to find ways to find solutions. So rejecting the premise of the question doesn't help. What I'm trying to say to you is that we have heard from law enforcement saying that this is a problem. So we are trying to find ways to be helpful here. So tell us what you are willing to do to make sure that things that look like AR-15s that might shoot Nerf darts don't actually end up getting people killed. That's what we're trying to get to.
Just a quick answer, please, 15 seconds if you could.
Yeah, so with how I opened, I think that reducing these instances in the first place would be the best scenario. So we recommend liability waivers and 18 plus to reduce these instances in the first place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And I thank the witnesses for their presence today. First, I'd like to address the Canadian Airsoft Group. I was listening to my Liberal colleagues say that the purpose of this bill is not to shut down your industry, but my understanding is that you were not consulted before the bill was tabled. Am I understanding this correctly?
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. And the answer to that question is no. The government did not consult the industry or the players' associations that exist in various provinces before this bill was tabled. And I think the volume of response from our community, including direct submissions to this committee, perhaps made it clear to the honourable members that this is a serious issue and that many people are engaged in it, and that a consultative process, when looking at legislating an industry away, should be part of that process. In this case, it was not. We were not consulted in any way.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think that's kind of strange when I hear my Liberal colleagues say we don't want to shut down your industry, we want to find some common ground, but you were not consulted at the outset. And I find this approach, at least by the Quebec Airsoft Association, with whom you probably work closely, was very constructive and very reasonable, because your industry is highly affected by this bill. Instead of saying we want to remove all these clauses that affect airsoft, you're looking to find compromises based on what's happening in California or in British legislation as well. I imagine that you agree with the recommendations of the Quebec Airsoft Federation, but I wondered if you could tell us more about how far you'd be willing to go to supervise your industry without shutting it down completely.
Another very good question. The airsoft community and industry has been operating in an absence of regulation for a very long time. And so one of the things that we want to achieve by this process is to bring in place clear regulations so that not only players but importers, retailers all know the lay of the land and can predict outcomes. This is one of the biggest issues with airsoft in general, because it operates within the spaces between regulation. And that's it's been a successful community for very long, built to the size that I mentioned earlier. But it's very true that this is an opportunity. This bill is an opportunity to clear away this landscape of unsure circumstances and put in place clear regulations. And what we propose, and our colleagues in the Quebec Federation as well agree, that a clear 18-plus requirement for purchase, a waiver at point of sale indicating clearly the potential responsibilities and dangers in possession of these things. In addition to that, clear markings and labeling on these devices so that people that purchase them know the responsibilities and know that they are responsible to ensure that they're used safely and according to the law. In addition, the application of clear regulations allows us to clearly provide that information to end users, importers, exporters, and purchasers and retailers. So, what we're really hoping to achieve here is a removing of the fog, so to speak, and clear regulation and a clear path forward for our industry. Our esteemed members have said they don't want to destroy our industry, but this bill does, completely and finally. And without clear regulation, it's devastating to many people who have invested their life savings in businesses and purchased property for these things to happen.
I'm sorry, sir, I have to cut you off there.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Madame Michaud, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for helping guide our committee through this study. I'd like to start with Airsoft.in.Canada. This summer, my constituent, John Bell, he took me out to the Victoria Fish and Game Protective Association, put me in some referee garb, and I got to watch one of your competitions. And you're right, I agree with your opening statement. There were people, young and old, all kinds of demographics who'd come to enjoy a good time in the outdoors. So very sympathetic to your sport. It's obvious that people who engage with it are very passionate, and as evidenced by the campaign thus far, they're very motivated to engage with this committee. So I salute you in your efforts for that political engagement. When we look at the way C-21 is currently written, having an airsoft gun suddenly deemed as a prohibited device. I mean, I know it's for the purposes of sections of the criminal code, weapons trafficking, possession for the purpose of weapons trafficking, and so on. So specific sections. But, I mean, what kind of an effect does that have on an owner, just knowing that suddenly your device is now going to be deemed prohibited, that kind of a chill effect?
Thank you for the question. I'll put that question over to my colleague Nicholas Martin, who is our community liaison. He can answer that question. Thank you.
Hey, Alistair. Thank you for the question. So a few of the issues that we get right now are concerns about after the bill's passed, what happens if they were to go and sell it? Well, obviously that's illegal under the criminal code because they would be considered prohibited firearms for that purpose of the criminal code. But the immediate chilling effect is we have been told that we could keep the ones we have and we get to keep using them. But as C-21 is currently written under Section 117.03 of the Criminal Code, it empowers the police officers to take airsoft guns on site. There's no reason for it. They don't have to have a reason, no probable cause, nothing. So the fear is that if they were to go to a paintball field, play an airsoft game, police officer could show up and just take their property because there's no way to get it back, right? So yeah, the fear is that
Can I just interrupt?
Play airsoft more. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry about that. It's just I have limited time. So you've made some helpful suggestions for our committee in your opening statement. You recommended an 18 or older for restrictions on purchasing, that risk waiver, making a person who's purchasing it understand the responsibility that comes with owning such a device. But when you look at how C-21 is written, I'm worried about I'm trying to figure out how we are going to fit your amendments within how C-21 is currently written, because what we're doing is we're adding a new section to the criminal code, specifically a section 3.2 after the existing 3.1 of section 84. Have you figured out some of the technical writing pieces on, do you believe this existing clause can be amended properly to take into account what you're hoping to achieve? I guess what I'm asking is, can you help guide our committee through how you would ultimately like to see this clause rewritten?
I think some of the difficulty right now has been that we haven't had consultation up until this point. So the process of being able to discuss what amendments we'd be open to or how to achieve them hasn't even been able to gun because the government hasn't spoke with us. But we would be more than happy to talk and explore options and how it can be fitted into the bill, what amendments are and are not possible within our community.
Okay, thank you. And I did hear you say in your opening statement and in answer to one of my colleagues that you were also looking for some, I guess, more specifics written through regulatory power. So maybe having this bill authorize the government to make specific regulations with how the guns are marked, et cetera? Yes,
okay.
Yeah, I'll pass it back to Brian.
Thank you. Specifically, we're seeking to empower the government to make regulations in the context of this bill, because regulations is where everything really comes, where the rubber hits the road. And we're looking for regulations that clearly define what a replica is, rather than the rather broad definition now, and hopefully specifically defining exactly what an airsoft gun is and how it fits within the context of the regulations, which clears the field for everybody and allows importers to import articles that meet those requirements, allows retailers to sell those articles that meet those requirements, and allows end users to confidently know that the objects that they have in their possession are not illegal and don't represent a risk for any sort of prosecution just by having them.
I'd like to switch quickly, because I am going to be short on time, to my friends at Airsoft. I recently received an email. I'm not going to mention the gentleman's name. He's from Barrie. And this is a little lengthy, but I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from this and ask for your input on if this is normal, what's going on, because I don't play Airsoft. Some family members have in the past. I don't know a lot about it. So I'm going to paraphrase here by starting. This is from my resident. It is truly a team sport that brings together players from all different walks of life and provides a community that accepts all sorts of people gathering around a common passion. I also believe that it has a part to play in getting the youth away from screens and video games and puts them out into an afternoon of play, requiring some physical effort as well as critical decision-making. Airsoft has helped my life personally in so many ways, including sobriety. There is so much positivity surrounding the sport. I play competitively with a very active team every week, but I also play on another team called AAA, which stands for Airsoft Addicts Anonymous. We met up usually once a month or more, and it keeps growing and growing. Airsoft is for everyone and has zero downsides. It should have no place in this bill. It will break my heart if Bill C-21 is passed and these opportunities are taken away from the current and future generations of players having their favorite sport outlawed for reasons we do not find legitimate nor convincing. The letter's a lot longer. I'll leave it at that. Perhaps you could comment on that and tell me a little bit about the type of people who are playing this sport across Canada.
Thank you for the opportunity to answer that question. So I've been involved in the community since 2005, and I've seen people, mostly young men, because the demographic does slide to young men participating in airsoft, although that's broadening now. The appeal is broadening. But I've seen young men change before my eyes over a period of a couple of years from basement dwellers that don't see the light of day to young men who are empowered, who become leaders and mentors in their own right. This is what keeps me involved in this. I'm way older than most people that are involved in airsoft, but this is what keeps me involved in this community, is the transformation that happens with young men and women that get involved in this. It's inspiring to see. There's few opportunities for young people to learn leadership skills, and this is one of the environments where it does happen. To learn confidence, to learn how to interact with other people in a collaborative and cooperative way. All of these skills are learned and developed on the airsoft field. And the transformations of young people becoming adults, becoming entrepreneurs, starting businesses, and getting jobs to pay for their hobby, it really is something to see. So the impact is very large, and that letter is a very good example of the kinds of things that we hear every day.
Thank you. And I think, Mr. Chair, I'm very low on time. How much?
22 seconds.
Just very quickly then, this is probably not going to get much of an answer, but also a constituent of mine owns a paintball and airsoft pro shop in Barrie. He says that C-21 in its current form will result in a loss of 60 to 70% of his revenue and force the closure of his business that he spent 20 years building. Are you hearing that?
Yes, I'll put that over to Mr. Wan. He's a business owner himself.
Hello. So I've been working in the airsoft industry for about a decade now, and about 50% of retail sales are from the airsoft devices themselves. So I believe the statistic that we gathered was over 90% of airsoft businesses expect to close immediately if C-21 is passed in its current state.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
To our friends at the Airsoft, this recommendation, as you know, has come from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. The government didn't just come up with it on their own. In June of 2021, I met with the Airsoft Business Association. I did pass their comments, similar to yours, on to the previous ministers. So, and you have been meeting with the current minister's staff to discuss the types of things. Is that correct?
There has been the opening of meetings, so it's at preliminary stages at this point, and so we're hoping to develop far more connections and more meetings.
So would you be open to safe storage regulations?
So safe storage and transportation is something that we absolutely are interested in, and our community is not against it.
And we had the opportunity to chat. You mentioned a UK model that is used that you're going to provide us in a written brief. Could you perhaps just very quickly describe that?
Yes. So the UK model brings into place a requirement to be a member of an insured association before you can purchase an airsoft gun. There's a two-tier system in there in which the lower tier of airsoft items are colored or partially transparent, and these are widely available. And then the higher tier...
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off because I have a really quick question for Mr. Winkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll use the remainder of my time again with Airsoft.in.Canada. This is the one time we have you before our committee. I think when the committee was suspended, we were having a conversation about what the UK has. You mentioned two tiers of airsoft, some that are, I guess, translucent, obviously don't look like a real firearm, and then there's a more like quote-unquote professional class. Other jurisdictions, I think California might require an orange tip on the end of the barrel. When it comes to the appearance, I know that a lot of people in the sport, they've spent a lot of money on airsoft guns that really do look like the real thing, and that's very important to industries like the film industry, where they want to use a replica to reenact a historical scene, as an example. I guess this could happen through regulations, but have you fleshed out anything on the topic of like how we could modify their appearance, or even when the airsoft guns are in transport, so that it's quite obvious that when you're carrying it, maybe it's got an orange tip on it, it could not be mistaken when you're going from your place of residence to where you're engaging in the sport. Anything you can add to that conversation?
Thank you. I'll put that question over to Mr. Wan as our technical expert.
Hello, and thank you for the question. I believe that having something like an orange tip may not be the most effective solution to that. I think that one of the problems right now is that there is no federal level transport law regarding airsoft devices. Right now they're under municipal bylaws. So what would be helpful is if there were a universal transport type regulation where you had to use an opaque container so that you are not carrying one of these devices in the public eye.
So you could never make that mistake of being mistaken for carrying something that looked like the real thing. Having that opaque case, in your mind, that's the preference for your industry.
I think that is something that most responsible players are already engaging in.
Yep.
However, it would be good if that were enforced more so than individual retail outlets telling their customers to do so.
Okay. Well, thank you for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And that kind of brings our second round to a close as far as we can go. I would like to thank all of our witnesses for sharing their time with us and their expertise and for helping us in our study. And with that, I will suspend as we bring in the second